Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Veronica. In today's video, I will be discussing basically our autism journey. It will be a little bit long because I will be discussing both Cameron and Autumn in this one video. It has been 4 years since they have been diagnosed, and I just feel like I am in a much better place to share our journey. And also I remember just going through it feeling alone and sad because I just kind of felt like I was the only person dealing with it. So I just want to share our journeys. I believe the CDC recently released the new numbers of the autism rates, and it's 1 in 59 children. So even though it can be a emotional roller coaster when you're finding this information out about your own child, you know, you're not the only person dealing with it. So Cameron and Autumn were both diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder as well as intellectual disabilities. So jumping right into our story, the beginning. So starting with Cameron, because he is the oldest. So when he was born, I was 19 years old. I was a young mom. For the most part, he hit all of his milestones. I remember the day he was born, the lactation specialist made a comment about how strong his neck was and how it was pretty abnormal for a newborn to have such neck strength. Within the first month of Cameron's birth, he doubled his weight. And then at about 3 months old, he used to do this thing where he would look at me and look away real quick, and then look at me and look away real quick. He used to do it all the time. He was a very quiet baby. He would only cry when, you know, he was hungry, needed to be burped, had a messy diaper, things like that. But he was very quiet other than that. And then right around 3 months, he got colic. And it was pretty intense. It scared me because he was puking so much. The doctor just said to give him some like gripe water, burp him, brushed it off as like acid reflux, and that it was normal. And since he wasn't losing weight, it didn't seem to be an issue. When Cameron was 4 or 5 months old, he did not like loud noises. And then not just loud noises, but like singing. He didn't like if my mom would sing around him, he would get really upset. Sometimes he would bang his head on the couch. He would kind of scream, yell a little bit to drown out her singing, and cover his ears. And she's not a terrible singer or anything, so that was pretty interesting. He didn't like sirens, but he would just cover his ears. 9 months old or so, he went through this phase where he would only let me make his food. I remember the day it started and his dad was making him eggs, and he just didn't eat them, which was weird because he liked eggs and I had just made him eggs the day before. So then I just said, let me make them and then we'll see. And I made them and then he ate them, and we just thought it was a silly thing that he was a mama's boy, so he only ate mama's food. So for the most part, up until then, he was hitting all his milestones. He started walking at about 10 months old. I held him a lot. He didn't really crawl because we had a walker. Autumn was born when Cameron was 13 months old, and when she was born, she did not sleep. She slept the first month and she was fine. She breastfed fine, but then after about the first month or so, she just did not sleep. It was very difficult for me just because Cameron was teething at that age, and he didn't really sleep that much, and neither did she. During this time, when he's teething and she's not sleeping, there was many days where I would just put her in her crib, and if Cameron was napping or watching a movie, I would just go into the bathroom and pretty much cry for 5 minutes at a time. I felt very overwhelmed. I think I had postpartum depression, but I never got diagnosed with it or anything. And then I was just literally pouring from an empty cup at that point. I mean, this lasted up until probably last year, her not sleeping. But she hit all her milestones as well. She started walking at 9 months old, which was so cute because she was this tiny little baby just like walking around. It was adorable. So there was nothing that I really noticed with Autumn early on in those early years. The only thing, about 6 months old, she started teething. She did not cry when she was teething. She had no, she had a very high pain tolerance, I guess, and it's like she would whine a little bit and then the next day she would have some teeth, but it wasn't like Cameron, for instance. He cried a lot and he had a very hard time teething, whereas she didn't. Like, she would just like kind of be fussy one day and then the next day her teeth would be like popped through. When she would fall, she wouldn't cry. As she got older, there was nothing else that I had really noticed. She didn't really like loud noises either, but I just chalked it up to her being like a baby and, you know, just not liking them. I didn't think anything of it. She hit all her and Cameron pretty much hit all of their milestones. Oh, another thing with Cameron was that he would line up his cars or his toys, but again, that doesn't scream like, oh, my child's autistic or anything. A lot of kids line things up, so I just didn't think about it. Of course, he was very particular about lining his things up, like nobody could move it. If you did move it, he would put it back. So, but again, I didn't think anything of it. They were both very like happy children, like they were happy babies. They babbled and things like that. Cameron gained speech at about, I don't know exact dates, but you know, a little over a year. He would, or maybe even a little bit younger, he would say mama, dada, like sing little lullabies. When Cameron was about 2.5, that's when I started noticing him regressing with his speech. He pretty much lost all of his words at about 2.5. He started exhibiting just odd behaviors. But up until then, he played with other kids. He seemed to, it's not like he was just by himself and all the other kids would be playing like without him. He was always with them. Looking back, it was more parallel play, but he did engage with them. I always found Cameron to be odd, even as a baby, again with the shifty eyes and just being very quiet. I always thought that there was something just a little just off about him. Not like, you know, nothing like too, you know, I didn't know what it was, but I just thought it was very strange. Once the speech regression happened, the pediatrician, again, didn't seem too worried about it. And again, you know, the pediatrician only sees him for like 15 to 20 minutes and that's it, you know. So I was talking to him about him like, oh, I was like, and I explained to him like, oh, he used to say these words and he doesn't really say them anymore. And then he basically made it seem like regression was normal, and not to be too worried about it because he is still pretty young, and even though it's a milestone he should have hit, it's just a guideline, and it doesn't necessarily mean he has to talk at this age or he has to say this amount of words at this age. He told me that it was just a guide for kids. So when the pediatrician made it seem like not that big of a deal, I just went with it because I didn't know. A lot of people in my life at that time were telling me that, you know, telling me their anecdotal stories of my kid didn't speak till he was 4 and he's fine now, you know, oh, my cousin didn't talk till he was 7, and, you know, things like that. So I just didn't think anything of it. So right after this, me and their dad ended up splitting, and I moved with my mom. My aunt, uncle, and my 2 cousins were living with my mom as well at the time. So one of my cousins is the same age as Autumn, my kids and my cousins as well. I was just noticing more and more just how delayed my kids were. During this time as well, when I was living with my mom, I was going to court with the kids' biological father, so I was really an emotional mess. During this time, my mom and aunt, they both worked for the school district in that area and worked with special needs kids. So I remember one day they come home from work and they sat me down to talk to me about the possibility of Cameron and Autumn being autistic. I was obviously in denial, and I was in denial, still holding on to hope, basically, that it was just they were delayed and everything else was fine with them. So I wasn't too happy when they told me this, and a lot of it has to do with, you know, being a kid, or, you know, being a human on Earth is kind of already a difficult thing without anything else added to it. So I was just pretty upset that they would, I was upset that they thought that. I didn't exactly like jump into getting them evaluated or anything like that. I googled it during that time, but I pretty much brushed it off and didn't, you know, was just more annoyed with them than anything. But I did Google autism and the symptoms of it, and there was a few things I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but then, you know, these things don't make sense, because Cameron made eye contact, Cameron, you know, was affectionate. During this time as well, Cameron had started like humping. I know it's kind of like a weird thing to do as a kid, but apparently a lot of kids do it. But he wouldn't like hump. I don't know how to explain it. He would just like lay on the floor, and it seemed like he was just humping the floor. But when I talked to the pediatrician, they said that it's kind of normal because he's a boy, and I don't know. I guess it's just kind of normal for boys at around the age of 3-ish to start doing stuff like that. So that happened. I thought it was super weird. Didn't think anything of it though. And then so also during this time in summer of 2013, Autumn was very much in her own world. She didn't really, she did play with my cousins. She did play with the kids and stuff like that, but she was always just kind of running off, never really listening. She didn't like loud noises. If the baby cried, she would scream, and then the kids would go through this screaming battle of like one kid would make a noise, another kid would make a noise, Autumn would scream, Cameron would scream, and then it would just like go, it would keep going. It was actually kind of a funny thing, but also pretty obnoxious. And then so right after this, I want to say in August of 2013, after everything was done with the court with their dad, I had moved back to California. Me and my aunt and the kids, we all moved back to California. At this time though, when we had moved back, I was kind of more and more thinking like, okay, my kids seem like they are, like the symptoms of autism do fit them. So I was kind of more and more like getting convinced that my kids were autistic, but of course I was still holding out hope that it was just delays. When I moved in with my grandma, Autumn started eloping a lot. She would just take off running. Sometimes her and Cameron would both do it, but it would usually be because she opened the door and, you know, he was just with her, so they would run out together. Cameron and Autumn did play a lot together, so that was one of the things that didn't really fit them, was because they played together, they kind of, you know, I didn't think that they weren't playing with other kids. And then Cameron would also like bang his head on the floor a lot, and he would also run as fast as he could into my grandma's front door. Her front door was like a heavy wooden door, and I remember one day he did it and he just had this huge like purple bruise on his forehead, and I was like, that's not like good, like he needs to stop doing that, like that's really bad. But he did that for a while and then he stopped. I think he just hit himself really good one day and just like gave up on running into the door. Again, at this time I'm feeling more and more like hopeless and helpless, like realizing that there's something very delayed with my kids. They need help. I need to know what to do. I made an appointment. It takes a while. Once we moved back to California, it took a while for insurance to kick in, and then it took a while for their pediatrician to have an appointment available. Like I think it took like 4 months altogether to get into the pediatrician's office. And then when we got into the pediatrician's office, it was for a physical. And then, you know, when all of it was done, the pediatrician was like, oh, you know, is there anything else? And I just said that my kids needed an autism evaluation. And then the doctor looks at Cameron, him and Cameron make eye contact, and he says, oh, he made eye contact, he's not autistic, you need to discipline him. So my grandma was super pissed. I was pretty pissed because I just knew something was different about Cameron and Autumn, and I just wanted them to be evaluated, and this doctor just made it seem like nothing, like all the doctors have been doing since all of my concerns were just brushed off. When I was making another appointment for his next, you know, doctor's appointment, because you have to make them months out in advance, I was talking to the front desk lady, and I had mentioned to her what happened with the doctor and me asking for an autism evaluation. And she said that even though he won't authorize one, that she will set me up with an appointment with their child psychologist. So basically I could just bypass him because he was not interested in doing the paperwork or whatever it was to put Cameron, or to, you know, get Cameron into an autism evaluation. So the woman was like, I'll set you up with the child psychologist here, and you know, that. So I did that, but that appointment was 3 or 4 months out. After that, when I was like more open with my other family members about like, oh, I think Cameron and Autumn are autistic, one of my other aunts sent me some information about the regional center in the area. Every county in California has a regional center, and that's basically where you could go get autism evaluation. I called them, told them what was going on. We made an appointment for an autism evaluation. It was about 6 weeks out. And during this time, when I'm living with my grandma and aunt, I was working 2 jobs, and I just felt very, I was not ready for the single mom life. I did not understand the balance of being a mom as well as working 2 jobs. I wanted to go out and kind of have fun still. My aunt helped me a lot during that time with taking care of the kids and basically helping me. She would babysit if I wanted to go out. She was super helpful during that time, as well as dealing with her own kids and her own family. So I was super grateful for that, but it also caused us to fight a lot because I was not in the headspace of being a mom at that time. And looking back on it, I obviously feel very guilty because my kids really needed me, but I was kind of void at that point. I was just going through a lot, and I didn't know how to be a mom, but I was trying. After that, I think Cameron's evaluation was like a few weeks out, and when we showed up to that evaluation, it takes about 2 hours to be evaluated, the observation and then the paperwork I had to fill out, and that doctor was kind of annoying because I asked him right after everything, I asked him if he thought Cameron was autistic, and he told me he couldn't tell me until after he did all the paperwork, which I get it, because what if he said yes and then it was wrong? Or what if it was something else? What if it wasn't autism but sensory processing disorder, or a ton of other things it could have been, I guess. So I was kind of annoyed because I'd wanted to get him into Head Start, which is like an early intervention thing. When I had tried to do that after the appointment, it was just such a long waiting list, and since Cameron didn't have a diagnosis, he wasn't considered high priority, so he was just waiting on this list. So I had to turn my air conditioner on because my camera keeps overheating, so that ridiculous noise is my air conditioner. So after Cameron's evaluation, a few months later was Autumn's. I ended up not getting them the appointment on the same day because I was still in denial with Autumn. So at Autumn's evaluation, the woman told me right away that she thought Autumn was autistic. She didn't say anything else about intellectual disabilities, but she did say, like, yeah, she's autistic. And then I had to wait for I believe it's 3 months to get the official diagnosis. So while waiting for their diagnosis, I couldn't do a lot. Cameron and Autumn weren't considered high priority because they didn't have a diagnosis in hand, or I didn't have a diagnosis in hand to get them into Head Start, which is a like a preschool here in California that's also early intervention. So I wasn't able to get them in that. They were just on the waiting list. Once I had gotten their diagnosis, I was able to start that process with schooling and everything, which was like one of the biggest headaches I'd ever had to deal with in my life, and I do want to do a separate video on that because it was pretty bad. And then I was able to get Cameron and Autumn were accepted into the Autism Center at Fresno State. It was a really great program, and within the first month of that program they were potty trained completely, and Cameron and Autumn are about 3 and 4 at this time, completely potty trained day and night. The people are fantastic that worked there. Cameron and Autumn progressed so much when they entered that program, and they were just in that program for, I want to say like 6 months, and then one of the people that worked with the kids helped me contact the school district and just start the process of getting another a school district evaluation, which is completely separate from the regional center. Even if you get a regional center diagnosis, which is an official diagnosis, you still have to go through a school district evaluation. So once we finally were able to do that, got into an autism preschool program, and it had like transitional kindergarten, all in the program, and luckily it was at the kids' home school, so it was right down the street from my house, which was really awesome. Once I got the diagnosis, it did seem like things were still pretty slow. With Fresno State, they had to do their own evaluation. School district had to do their own evaluation, so it is still a time-consuming thing even after you get the diagnosis. But yeah, so once we had the diagnosis, they were in a Fresno State Autism Center as well, and then a few months later they got into the school district, into school, which was amazing as well. And they started just progressing so much, and I'm so thankful for that. It's been 4 years since all of that happened, and it has definitely been a roller coaster. Yeah, so since then they've just been in school, and they are still currently in ABA therapy, as well as speech therapy. So that is pretty much the story of our autism journey. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Hopefully you subscribe to my channel.